Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. Senate Bill 256 would enact a new section of law that would be known as the Back to Work Act. On or before July 1, 2025, all full-time employees of each state agency are required to perform such employees' duties in the assigned office, facility, or field location of the employee. The bill does provide for some exceptions by the agency heads. Those exceptions could be for employees with non-standard work hours, including evenings, weekends, or holidays. Exceptions for positions where in-office employment would be deemed unreasonable, or in situations where office space constraints would require additional expenditures of the state agency to accommodate those employees. The bill then also provides that on or before August 1st, 2025, each state agency would submit to the Department of Administration the number of exceptions granted by agency heads and any other information deemed necessary by the department. And then on before October 1 of 2025, the Department of Administration would then submit a report to this committee that includes a list of state agencies granting the exceptions, the number of exceptions granted by each agency head, job descriptions or job titles for the exceptions, the number of buildings in each state agency, the state agency leases and the annual cost of each lease agreement, and finally, the percentage of full-time employees assigned to a physical building that are working entirely remote or in a hybrid of in-office and remote work. And then for the purposes of 256, there are a couple of definitions for agency head. And I will also point out that state agency is defined we reference the statute, and that is that this would be any state office, officer, department, board, commission, institution, bureau, or other agency, division, or unit within any office, department, board, commission, or other state authority, or any person requesting a state appropriation. The effective date of 256 would be upon publication in the Register. And I would also kind of point out, because there's been some discussion that as part of the Senate Ways and Means, the budget deliberations, there was a proviso that was adopted by the committee concerning return to the office. It's slightly different than what is in 256, because that proviso was just for executive branch agencies, and the only exception there would be for those employees that have travel as part of their duties would be exempt from that. So executive branch agencies in the proviso versus all state agencies in 256. And with that, Madam Chair, I can stand for any questions.
Thank you so much. Questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you. We will now move on, committee, to proponent testimony. We have Seth Wagner, Chief Executive Officer of AIM Strategies. And conferees, you have 3 minutes. Welcome to committee.
Chairwoman Erickson and members of the Senate Committee on Government Efficiency, thank you for the opportunity to provide proponent testimony in support of Senate Bill 256. My name is Seth Wagner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of AIM Strategies, LLC. AIM Strategies, LLC was founded in 2014 with the overall goal of making investments in Topeka that will improve the quality of life in the city and make Topeka a more viable option for families and young professionals to live and work. The focus of AIM has really been to revitalize the downtown core of the city. AIM has invested well over $60 million in assets such as the Cyrus Hotel, Iron Rail Brewing, the Pennant, and our newest restaurant, Taco. And we've also invested in many other downtown properties, office space, apartments, and other items. The goal is to create a vibrant district for people to stay downtown, enjoy downtown, and have a city core that would spur additional long-term investment, not only by AIM, but other investors in a thriving public-private partnership. Obviously, for restaurant and hotel operators, the COVID pandemic changed everything for us basically overnight. We were able to adapt quickly to this changing world, but we have constantly had to adapt well past the initial shocks of the spring of 2020. One long-term factor that we did not expect was the lack of workers, specifically state workers, coming back downtown. We expected that a robust lunch business, which had always been our backbone, would rebound quickly. It did not. In some locations we've seen even today, our lunch business is off up to 10% versus where we were at in the fourth quarter of 2019, even accounting for inflation-adjusted numbers. Our happy hour business has never recovered to what we were at pre-pandemic levels due to less workers downtown. Is not only affecting AIM, but downtown saw attrition of other restaurants that closed since the COVID dollars ran out. Downtown Topeka has lost Jersey Mike's, Four Guys Bistro, Brewbank, the Olive Cafe, and other locations all closed their doors. This does not even begin to talk about the damage to the retail sector that was done downtown. That sector has basically been decimated over the last 24 to 36 months with no movement towards recovery. AIM has seen a complete flip of our business model, with weekend brunch and dinners now leading the way and driving revenue and people downtown. Proof that the work we are doing downtown to make the core better has worked long term. If we could recover the workers who were downtown before the pandemic, the downtown core would be set to take off once again in an incredibly positive direction. It has honestly been a lot of start-stop since 2020, with focus more on recovery and maintenance than additional capital investment. Our organization is extremely thankful that Senate Bill 256 is being considered to bring the workers back to the downtown core. Our goals have always been long-term with investment in making Topeka a better place to work and live.
Mr. Wagner, thank you so much. Your time is up. I appreciate your testimony. Thank you for being here today. Committee, that is the only oral proponent that we have. We do have written proponents. We have Roy Leonardson and Carrie Sue Vosberg, and I think he probably had another meeting or place to be. So with that, we will move on to our neutral testimony. We have Secretary Adam Proffitt, Department of Administration, for 2 days in a row. Welcome back to committee, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Adam Proffitt, Secretary of Administration, and I don't know if I need to say congratulations or apologies. Second day in a row. I will try to be brief. I did not realize we'd be on a 3-minute timeline, so I'll try to hit the highlights if that's all right. I did submit written testimony. I want to make it clear I'm testifying on behalf of the entire administration for the governor's office and the administration. I want to clarify a few things. You know, there seems to be confusion at times around remote work versus telework. With exceedingly rare exceptions, we do not offer remote work. Remote work is an instance where there is no in-office work location for an employee. They are fully remote and away from the office. We do very little of that. Telework is an instance that we do with some exceptions here in Kansas where it's a hybrid environment, right? The employee can work in the office some and at home some. We do offer telework with limited instances, and that has a lot of structure around it as well. As it relates to the governor's position on remote work and telework, her starting point is generally that workers should be in the office. You know, we are delivering services for constituents across the state, and we have a lot of things that we need to accomplish, and oftentimes that needs to be in office. There are some areas where it simply does not work to do telework. You think of a driver's license station, you think of vital stats, something where it's very customer facing. She also recognizes in consultation with her leadership team, cabinet secretaries, that there are instances where telework does work effectively and efficiently. So she's granted the authority to us to put safeguards around telework and allow that on a case-by-case basis, with the caveat that customer service will not slip and delivery of services to Kansans will not falter either. Those are the really two key caveats. We cannot let that fall. Excuse me. I also want to point out, and I'm on page 2 of my testimony here, safeguards around telework options. We do have safeguards around telework options. We, Department of Administration, provide a template for other agencies to utilize, and we put safeguards around what telework means. You have to have a dedicated office space, number of days in the office versus out of the office. The work needs to be done. You need to be able to be reached. You have to have the appropriate equipment, and it needs to be a job that fits a telework eligible facility, or excuse me, job. Telework can also be a modern recruiting tool. Many private entities still offer telework across the country. So we are not only competing on pay, which we know we are not going to get to an even playing field with the private sector, we're also competing on other benefits. And the legislature has been a generous partner with us in terms of offering robust benefits and looking at benefits. Telework is viewed as a benefit by many state employees. So if they have the opportunity to work telework 2 days a week, that's a great benefit for them. And we can actually expand our radius of talent that we're pulling from. Somebody from Kansas City who might not have otherwise looked at Topeka for a job, if they can stay in Kansas City 2 days a week versus coming to the office 2 days a week, that could be a benefit for them. Before the dinger comes up on me, I also want to raise the potential issue of separation of powers. I'm going to let the governor's office really weigh in on this and talk about the legal construction, but the Constitution does vest the entire executive, the supreme executive power of the state of Kansas and the governor. Want to make sure that we address separation of powers issues. One particular issue is think about inclement weather days or other instances where it might require folks to not be in the state of Kansas. I don't think this bill, the exceptions provided, allow for any flexibility there. So I want to make sure we can work through that together.
Thank you so much. Committee, we do also have written neutral from Carol Moreland, Executive Administrator of the Kansas State Board of Nursing. And with that, we will open it up. Are there any questions for Mr. Profit? Senator Thompson.
Thank you. Thanks. Is there a significant change in FTEs since the pandemic that would make having these people going back into the office a problem? I'm just kind of curious on that.
Madam Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Senator. I'll have to look at the FTE report. I don't think there's a significant uptick in FTEs for the state. I do know that, and there was a legislative post audit I wanted to touch on as well that was done in 2023, that not many agencies really downsize their footprint, but there are some agencies that as they brought on employees, it was under the agreement that they'd have some telework flexibility or remote work flexibility. So I can think of a few agencies that do not have office space to bring some of these folks back into on a full-time basis. So that would be a concern we'd have to work through. But as to your question about more FTEs, I think the answer is not significant being in the eye of the beholder. But we can get that information for you. We have that available.
I can follow up with one other question, Manager. And with regard to the telework, how do you measure the efficiency of somebody who's doing that? I know when I got out of my previous career and I decided to start a business at home, you get a lot of distractions. It's tough. You have to be very, very disciplined. And then my wife wants me to do something and, go fix the toilet or something like that. How do you measure that efficiency of somebody working remotely in that way? Is there a good way of doing it?
Madam Chair, if I may, Senator, again, thank you for the question. This was actually addressed in the legislative post audit, and in their conclusion, I'm going to paraphrase, but I have the actual quote in my testimony. They said that there was no way to measure productivity at home, but agencies were reporting, and they sort of agreed that there was not a diminished return for employees in the work that they were doing. So that says to me that we have not noticed a decline in services being rendered or delivered. I can tell you directly for Department of Administration and also Division of Budget, which I also lead, there's not been a decline in productivity. Many of the jobs that are suitable for telework or hybrid work environment, not all of them have a very defined output for every single day, right? We're not churning widgets. For somebody who's at the driver's license station, we can see how many times how many applications they've worked through, what their wait time is, what their call queue is. So some of those you can do. For my accounting team, it's not number of journal entries per day. It's are we meeting our statutory obligation? Are we having any audit findings at the end of the year? Are we completing our job? So I would also say it's hard to measure that productivity in the office as well for those jobs, right? So what it boils down to is the employee at their workstation when they're supposed to be at home? If I call them on Teams, do they answer? Are they still getting their work done in the same fashion that they were when they were in the office? And as it relates to distractions, some of our folks have offices and you can shut the door and work in there very privately. Some are in large open areas with cubicles and there's a lot of distractions around. So a home environment in some instances actually provides for fewer distractions. I would also say that my expectation is that nobody's out there fixing their toilet or fixing their sink or mowing their lawn. If that's happening, that is in violation of the agreement that we have in place and that should be addressed.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? We'll go with Senator Holscher, then Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Adam, for being here. My question is relative to recruiting possibilities or recruiting efforts. Has there been some indication that being able to work in a hybrid fashion helps in recruiting?
Madam Chair, if I may. Thank you, Senator, for the question. Short answer is yes. We've heard those indications. Admittedly, that's anecdotal. I don't have the data on what that represents. But we do have employees that say that this is a benefit. This is one of the reasons I'm able to work here. One of the reasons I want to, like I said earlier, you expand the radius of eligible employees. I myself, I live in the Kansas City area on the western edge. I do, a lot of times on Fridays, take advantage of telework. During session, I don't. I'm usually in the building here. But right now, I do take advantage of that on Fridays. And for me, that's a benefit. It cuts down on $2.60 of toll each way on those Fridays, and also the miles that I drive in. So yes, it is a benefit, and some employees have been hired over the past couple of years with the understanding they would be able to work from home on some limited occasions.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here second day in a row, Secretary Prophet, although you didn't bring the snow and ice this time, so we thank you for that. I think it would be interesting, maybe this is an opportunity for follow-up. I do think it would be interesting for your team to try to study the impacts of if, for those that wouldn't be eligible for exception, if they come back into the office, what the impacts would be potentially on needed office space if current facilities could be able to handle that. And I think one of the spirit of the bill, I believe one of the spirits anyway, is to address the fact that with teleworkers and remote workers, we're concerned that there's budgeting and allocation of workspace for folks that are either not there at all, or they're 40% of the time, or they're 60% of the time. So I think it'd be important for the committee to try to understand if that's happening, and understand under current practice, if a teleworker is if a teleworker is allocated a full individual workspace, or if there are shared workspaces, and are we allocating and planning on having physical space for every single teleworking employee. And I think that's some of the concern is inefficient use of funds. So if anything that you could do to provide data information to that end would be very helpful for the committee, I think.
Madam Chair, if I can follow up on that just for a moment. Then Senator, thank you for the question and the spirit of that. I fully understand the question, and candidly, it's something I've struggled with in my own head. And as I speak with my peers across all the states in both of my roles, but specifically with administration, is something we've chatted about. And the issue is not unique to public service either. Private sector deals with this as well. There are many real estate consultants that we've chatted with over the years, and they've talked about what they've done with some private sector entities and some public sector entities. There's not a great answer yet, unless you want to move to a situation where it's hoteling is the phrase that's out there in the marketplace, right? Where you have a space that is big enough for 10, making this number up, 10 employees and 10 employees only. You have a staff of 20. You rotate every other day who goes in there. We're not there right now, right? So we can do our best. We provided the information on office space across the county and across the state yesterday. We can work with agencies to see, what is available and how we could best utilize that. So, and again, just to reiterate, the governor's position is she's a believer in trying to be in the office as much as possible, but recognizing and working with the leadership team and hearing feedback that there are instances where it does make sense to allow the flexibility.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. One question, since you've been here so often this last week or so, one question that I'm going back to your last presentation, not this presentation, but did you in your facilities plan, and as we move these moving chairs around, did you consider the remote locations? Did you consider the people that weren't working here today or worked in your total count, or did you have an office for every head per se? Is that how you figured it, an office for head? If they came back, they'd come back to here, or if we have to, we won't be able to have a place for them.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may, thank you, Senator, for the question. It sort of depended on the short answer is we had the engineers and architects come in and walk the current space of where the agencies are that are moving into docking specifically, and said, all right, how are you utilizing this space? Is this the best configuration, the best amount of space? How many actual bodies are you going to need in this new building? I don't know if they said, are these people out of the office or in the office, but they looked at the current configuration, how many desks were being utilized, how many desks were being needed, and purpose-built the new area around that. So to the extent that we made the best use of space, yes. I cannot answer directly whether they said, does that employee work Tuesdays and Thursdays at home, and do we need a space for them? I don't know if they got to that level of detail. For some of the backfills at Curtis specifically, I know that, I don't mean to speak for Colonel Smith at the Kansas Highway Patrol, but by and large, they don't offer telework. So, they did need the entirety of the square footage that's being offered there at the Curtis State Office building. So the answer is yes, we did a very thorough space review. Did we ask the question, does this employee need a cubicle or an office every single day? I don't know if that question was answered. It really wasn't when, during my review, I said, I need this much space for these times of year.
The question I was really, and thank you for the answer, that's exactly
sir.
what I figured. But if they had a employee that was totally off-site, and then this were to go through and we had to bring him back, did he count that employee? I don't think that was kind of the.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'll speak for a division of the budget. If there was an employee that, well, for example, my chief of staff, shares time between my administration office and my budget office, I did not give him a dedicated workstation in my new area. But we do have some open areas or some shared working space that we made sure that there could be, somebody else claimed to the office. There's a space available for them, maybe not your traditional office or cubicle that takes up the entirety of it.
Thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just looking at your fiscal note, too, and talking about KDHE estimating $842,000. Primarily, I think their concern was they don't have the physical office space. But within the bill, it grants them authority to accept out employees who it's not deemed reasonable for them to be. And maybe this is more for a revisor. What would be a granted exception? Would just the lack of office space be considered an exception that's deemed problematic and exempt out an employee for that reason? I'm just curious.
Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, in Senate Bill 256 there, and it'd be subsection B, 3, that would be one of the possible exceptions that the agency head could grant if there are office space constraints that require additional expenditures of the state agency to accommodate employees. So that's spelled out in 256.
That's one of the exceptions. So that $842,000 KDHE, they could exempt those employees out and null out that fiscal note, correct?
Madam Chair, yeah, assuming that exception is granted and assuming the entirety of that 842 is tied to that, then that could go away.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you for the indulgence, Madam Chair. Thank you, Adam, again for being here. I'm going to go back to the remote work versus telework. Based upon your testimony, we really don't have, or it's very rare to have remote work. What we see is probably more of a hybrid where some days are in the office, potentially a couple days working at home. So I guess I'm looking at some of the testimony from a proponent talking about flexibility without guardrails is a problem. But what I'm hearing is we have guardrails in terms of, again, it's very rare to have remote work, but we have more of a hybrid version. Which, from looking at some of the other testimony, seems to indicate that, departments still have meetings. They have days when people are in the office. So could you expound upon that a little bit for me?
Yes, thank you for the question. And if I may, there's also, and I was going to bring this up, but as I reread the bill, I think it addressed it. We do have field staff. So you think Department of Agriculture, for example, approximately 40% of their staff are considered field staff. Some might consider that remote. That's not what they do. They're out there traveling the state, inspecting restaurants, inspecting agricultural land. So they truly do not have an office location because it's done in the field. Those are not remote staff. As it relates to the guardrails, yes, we do have guardrails, and I can speak to my agencies in particular that, for example, if somebody is scheduled to work telework on Tuesdays and Thursdays, if we have a meeting that requires in-person attendance on Tuesday, you're in the office. And that's just kind of how it is, right? And that's the agreement that we have in place. Again, we don't view this as an employee right. It's an employee benefit, and it does have to have guardrails around it. There should be guardrails, again, around how many days out of the office there are. It might vary agency by agency or maybe even time of year, depending on what the workload may be. And again, there is an agreement that should be signed by every employee under the governor's jurisdiction anyway, that speaks to these guardrails and what the expectations are, having a place of privacy, being able to come into the office when it's necessary. So did that answer your question, Senator?
Okay, I do have just one quick question before we move on. I see in your testimony, and we've heard here that it's exceedingly rare with exceedingly rare exceptions, the state of Kansas does not offer fully remote work opportunities. When I look at the fiscal note under KDH&E, they state in the fiscal note that they currently have 168 employees who work entirely remotely and do not have designated office space. So I guess my question is, what is exceedingly rare in light of their testimony or their comment in the fiscal note?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. And candidly, I could have chosen better English, right? Exceedingly rare is a subjective term. I should have stuck to objective terms, so my apologies for that. I think exceedingly rare is a recognition of the fact that there are approximately 18,000 non-Regents state employees. So if we're looking at anywhere in the neighborhood of 168 to upwards of 400, that's still a very, very small percentage. That's where the language exceedingly rare came in. Apologies, I should have said in very rare instances or in limited instances. Department of Revenue, not to put them on the spotlight here, but I guess I just did. They do have a section that works basically remotely. And they've provided me, and I'm happy to provide those to the committee, some of the guidelines and qualifications that allow those employees to do that. And they've also demonstrated a success and an increase in the productivity of those employees and what they're specifically charged with doing over time. And their agreement was, if this slips, that remote work goes away, we need to find an office space for you. So we do try to ensure that to the extent that you can quantify a particular output, back to Senator Thompson's question, then we try to identify those outputs and make sure they are increasing. Otherwise, we just look at the general productivity and the performance of the employee.
Thank you. I don't know if I've ever had so many questions for a neutral conferee. So I thank you very much for this information, for you being back today.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, we will now turn to opponent testimony, and I'm going to apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. We will start with Francis Dewell. Francis? And you have 3 minutes. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Madam Chair Erickson, committee, thank you for allowing me here today to testify. I want to let you all know that I am here testifying on behalf of myself. I'm not representing any agency. The Kansas Protection Report Center will stand to lose, at minimum, at least 25% of their staff. They are teleworking at this time. Should this Senate Bill 256 pass, they have 76 specialists trained to process reports, those reports that are called in to the Kansas Protection Report Center of child and adult abuse neglect. They 76 specialists, and it was standing to lose 25% of those. With that, along with an additional 10 to 15% staff being gone for trainings, appointments, and whatever else, that could leave us at minimal around 30 specialists to process. At least, we average 7,600 reports per month that we have to do. And so that will greatly impact. In your primary note, in the fiscal note, excuse me, it talks about retention and recruitment. And that is so vital to the Kansas Protection Report Center. They have been able to recruit workers statewide. They suffered a 25% vacancy rating in 2023, and at that time, at that time, PRC was only limiting it to at least an hour away for an applicant to be hired. But we were given approval through telework that we could hire statewide, anywhere statewide. We are now, PRC is now staffed at fully. I believe there is one vacancy left remaining. PRC has created a virtual work culture that has been successful since the beginning of COVID. In this culture, communication and collaboration opens opportunities for growth, as well as a sense of belonging, and prioritizes employee well-being. Yes, state workers could return to a pre-COVID office setting. However, the changes that have developed over the last 5 years have compelled us to evolve. Workers, stakeholders are having their obligations met, having their things met. And while we continue to provide the services needed for vulnerable Kansans. I ask you, Madam Chair, and the committee, to please listen to the voices of Kansans, Kansas workers who provide essential services while successfully teleworking from home. I request that you carefully consider my testimony and reject Senate Bill 256. Thank you.
Thank you. And are you able to remain until all of the conferees have testified for questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Committee, next we have Tandy Walters. Tandy, welcome to committee.
Lower this quite a bit. Need to bring a stool next time. Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair and Senate committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today in opposition to Senate Bill 256. My name is Tandy Walters, and both my spouse and I are state employees, and I'm an HR manager for a state agency here in Topeka. My written testimony that I provided included lots of research supporting flexible work options, namely remote work, but I feel that that's maybe something that I use interchangeably with telework. My written testimony provided information about the widespread labor shortage all across the United States, but also in Kansas, our already high turnover rate for the employer, state of Kansas, which was 18% in fiscal year '24. The fact that employees of all ages, family backgrounds, and jobs value work-life flexibility, and research indicates that between 30 and 60% of those employees would be willing to take a pay cut to keep working remotely. Remote work allows the work to continue uninterrupted during bad weather, flu season, and lengthy breaks in school schedules. Data shows that employees who have location flexibility are just as productive as in-office workers, and on average log more than 8 hours of work per day. I'd also like to suggest that if employees aren't productive, that is a performance issue that can be handled and not a policy issue. Remote work also recognizes and encourages that state agencies can modernize processes, enhance efficiencies, digitize, and improve online services for Kansans, particularly those in rural areas who are not close to brick and mortar locations. And remote work keeps people working, especially women who are often responsible for the majority of family obligations, or all in the case of single mothers. When adults work, families have greater financial security and a decreased reliance on government assistance. They generate more tax revenue for the state of Kansas, and women also drive consumer spending, so their financial empowerment can boost local economies. The list is long, and as an HR professional, I feel strongly about this as a strategic value, but I also want to share my personal story about how I was able to start working because of this benefit. In 2017, we had just moved from North Carolina to Lawrence, Kansas to be closer to family. My husband started a job at KU, my son Henry started kindergarten, and I had a baby. Shortly after Leo was born in 2018, he was diagnosed with a genetic condition called neurofibromatosis type 1, or NF for short. NF causes tumors to grow along nerves throughout the body. And it can also affect nearly every system throughout the body, causing issues such as visual and hearing impairments, learning and cognitive disorders, motor delays, bone abnormalities, and hypertension, just to name a few. He had a year of chemotherapy, during which we were at the hospital, Children's Mercy, every single Thursday for the whole year, and lots of other specialist appointments throughout.
If you could summarize, please, your time is expired, but if you could just summarize.
Sure. Anyway, this is a lifelong condition, and there is no cure, so we continue to see specialists even though he has progressed out of chemotherapy at this point. But when I decided that I wanted to go back to work, I took the job with the state of Kansas, knowing that I was going to be able to have that flexibility to spend 2 hours to go to an appointment with him, but come back and make up the work throughout the day.
Thank you. I
Yes, you're
appreciate your
welcome.
testimony
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much.
Committee, next we have Crystal Carr. Apologize if I did not pronounce that correctly. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairperson Erickson, members of the committee. My name is Crystal Kaur, and I've lived in Hoxie, Kansas for the majority of my life. And I'm here as an opponent for Senate Bill 256, and I speak on my own behalf. I'm here as a concerned rural Kansan. The Bill 256, or Back to Work Act, sorry, let me back up here. Before I worked for the state of Kansas, worked at a private sector, locally owned gas station in a very rural part of Kansas, Hoxie. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Hoxie. And I have firsthand experience receiving benefits from the state of Kansas. So I know what it's like to be on the other end of this, not just as a state employee, but as someone who received benefits. So this bill eliminates hybrid work and remote work for state employees under the assumption that being in office equals productivity. But as we've seen, that's not really the case. Right now, the state remote work is a critical recruiting tool to attract employees with eligibility specialists whose starting pay is approximately $18 an hour. This is already a difficult position to fill, and the recruitment and retention will plummet, which will result in longer wait times for clients who receive food assistance, TANF, and child care subsidies. The statewide call center that conducts eligibility interviews is full before 8:30 a.m. daily, meaning that clients often have no choice but to go into their local DCF office to request interviews for their cases to be worked. To handle this demand, Northwest Kansas has implemented what's called a virtual lobby, where clients can walk into their local DCF office and pick up a phone and talk to an eligibility specialist instead of waiting for someone in office, which has also allowed workers from all over the state to help whatever office has a high demand of clients coming into their office requesting for their reports to be worked. The impact on rural child protection services is dangerous. Northwest Kansas covers massive geographic areas, with my area alone covering 8 counties for child and adult protective services. This will put children and vulnerable adults at great risk. We already face high burnout and a high turnover rate due to the emotional toll and overwhelming caseloads in rural Kansas for these positions. NASW is the largest professional organization representing social workers. They have explicitly supported policies that reduce stress, prevent burnout, and improve worker retention. This bill does not do that. This does the opposite. SB 256 forces workers back into the offices without solving any efficiency issues. This disregards the unique needs of rural workers who already commute long distances to get to their assigned offices. So while this bill claims that agency heads can grant exceptions to the in-office requirements, there is no guarantee that all factors will be considered to grant these exceptions. This bill provides no clear criteria for how exceptions will be approved or denied, creating an environment where agency heads could just apply the rule inconsistently or deny exceptions altogether to avoid paperwork. I will just end with saying that if SB 256 is passed, I, as a remote worker in rural Kansas, will be forced out of my position as my office is in Topeka. That's where my official office is. Just like that, I will go from answering calls for Kansans in crisis to being a Kansan in crisis myself, forced to go back into the private sector with low-paying jobs and receiving the benefits that I once helped give as a state employee.
Thank you, Ms. Kaur. Appreciate you so much being here today.
Thank you.
Committee, our final oral opponent is Amber Schmidt. Amber, welcome to committee.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair and honorable members of the committee, for listening to my testimony today. I hope you guys did well with the ice yesterday. I was able to work from home. I am here on behalf of myself as a private citizen, even though I am also a state employee. I also would like to just mention that I was hired on for my current job with the hybrid work as a benefit that was offered to me, obviously as a benefit, not as a right or privilege. It's just a privilege. And I would like to mention to Senator Thompson, if you would like, Chair, that we are able to correct or address any inefficiencies or lack of productivity with performance reviews, which we have regularly, and I have them annually, and I've always had exceeded expectations. The proponent testimony earlier addressed that workers would be able to come back to the office, and that should hopefully help revitalize and spend more money downtown. I would like to say that for myself, coming back to downtown would actually cause me to incur more cost, and I would not be able to spend money downtown like I am currently able to do because I work from home part-time. It makes me have more money to be able to go down to lunch the days I come into the office, and when I was not able to do that, I would bring my lunch from home. Also, I would like to say that we could look at combining office spaces and saving money. I looked at the fiscal note for the rent that we pay for just Topeka alone, over $13 million in just rent for office spaces. If we could, instead of using Senate Bill 256 to force workers back into the office, work to combine office spaces and make it more efficient to where we could maybe reduce that overhead, I think that would be a much better use of our time and our taxpayer dollars as a personal citizen. Thank you. And I can stand for questions now or later.
Thank you, and that time is now. I believe that is all of the oral opponent testimony. Committee, I will draw your attention to the 15 written opponent testimony. Please take a look at that. It is included in our packet. With that, we will open it up for questions for the opponents. What questions do we have? Senator Holscher.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I actually have a question in regard to implications to people with disabilities. It's kind of alluded to in some of the written testimony, but I see Mike here. Is it okay if I call Mike? Would you maybe be able to speak to? My concern is this, that we might have people out there with disabilities that aren't necessarily visible. So is there any stipulation or any concerns into the impact that this type of bill might have on those populations?
Mr. Burgess, if you would just introduce yourself for the record.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Mike Burgess, and I'm the Director of Policy and Outreach at the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. And I probably can't say it any better than I believe there's opponent testimony from the Kansas Commission on Disability Concerns with Martha Gabehart. She was actually the one that helped bring this to our attention too. There absolutely would be concerns about accidental disclosure through the reporting process. Because right now, the state is required, or any employer is required to protect the identities where they're granted exceptions or providing accommodations to people with disabilities through their employment. And this, through some of the jobs, might create some issues if it's not implemented. But look at Martha's testimony. She says it far more eloquently than I can here at the well.
Thank you for being willing to answer the question.
I have a different one, but
Go ahead, Senator Holscher.
Okay, thank you.
We'll let you go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I address the committee?
You may.
Yeah, I had intended to speak, but I didn't follow all the rules that had changed since I've been here. So, I work for the Department of Transportation. I've worked remotely for 2 other companies before I came to work here, and it was full-time remote because I worked for a California company first, and then the second company was in Lenexa, Kansas, but they had no office. They only had remote employees. Because I work in the technology industry, the working remote is very natural to us. We know how to interact. In fact, it's easier to do code reviews and such things via the computer screens and interacting that way. With KDOT, I do the hybrid model, which is 2 days in the office and 3 days out, and we make sure that all the people are in the office on the same day. So.
Okay, well, do you have a question for Mr. Esau?
no, actually, my question was in regard to guardrails, and you just addressed that, so thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Committee, other questions for the opponent? Senator Alley.
Thank you, and this can be for any of the opponents. Do you have assigned space to you where you're in the office? Yes.
Whoever would like to take that, I believe. And please just restate your name for the record.
My name is Amber Schmidt, and again, I am testifying as a private citizen, but yes, I do have an assigned office space because I work with confidential documents, and we have to keep those in a locked room, and then when we handle them ourselves, we have to also keep them from the public eye. And I also have a private space when I work from home that I can review documents digitally with the security that IT makes us all the stuff.
Does anyone else use a space when you're not there, when you're working from home? Does anybody else use a space?
No, because again, we have confidential documents and things that we keep locked in our spaces. But we could definitely facilitate using shared spaces if we were able to, combine our agency's resources and work together to create dual office environments with, staggering days in the office. We could facilitate that by just keeping all of our secure documents in locked cabinets, which we already do, but, yeah.
Thank you.
Is it in regard to this question? Yes, please approach. And please reintroduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Frances Duell, again, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. And so, Senator Alley, your question was, is there space? Yes, there is space for the Kansas Protection Report Center. We do have offices in Topeka, Kansas City, and Wichita. Wichita does have some employees there. Topeka has one that's there, and they just chose to do that. So, however, we have also worked with our building manager across the state. And if an office is needed, if I may, to speak to guardrails, we do have those in place where we do monitor our productivity. It is monitored. We do have a way to make sure that staff are working and where they need to be as well. But yes, but again, that retention has helped us to hire way out so that they don't have to be close to one of those areas. So,
Okay, thank you.
thank you, sir.
Any other questions? I do have a question for our revisor. The testimony in regards to the disability workers and reporting not done correctly, is there anything in this bill that would be a threat or would not make sure that they're protected? Any requirement that would have to be reported? Would that fall under the exceptions? Can you just help us clarify that?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think in regards to persons with disabilities, I mean, that might be a position in which the in-office employment would be deemed unreasonable, just due to the accommodations that would need to be made. That could be an exception. And then in the reporting requirements, it doesn't specifically say that, list the individuals that are granted exceptions. It does the list by job description or job title, I suppose. If there was a small agency where there's only a few positions, that might be able to discern who that person was, but they're not listed by name. It's by job description or job title for each exception.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Seeing no other questions, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 256. Committee, we will not be meeting tomorrow. Seeing no other business, we are adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yesterday, I've been hearing some concerns about the lack of transparency around the submissions to the portal, and understanding that some of the things that were said yesterday, I don't think they necessarily apply to the committee members. I myself am not able to access the submissions, so I would like to submit an open records request.
That is fine. Thank you. Any other business before this committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned.